Our lecture today is going to be on Northern Renaissance art. Particularly, we're going to be looking at the 15th century, the 1400s. Now, up to this time in this class, we've really concentrated on the Renaissance that happens in Italy. And that is a tremendous amount of incredible art. However, remember that the Renaissance occurs all over Europe, even up in England. But we're going to focus on the area what's called Flanders. Now, Flanders is an area that covers parts of France, Belgium, Luxembourg, and the Netherlands. And we have some really incredible art that comes out of this area as well. Now, one of the most famous artists of Northern Europe is Jan van Eyck. And this is his famous work, the Arnolfini Portrait, which is really one of probably the 10 most famous paintings in the world. Not incredibly large, about 30 inches in height, but look at the incredible amount of detail that is present here. Now, this painting has also gone under various names, a lot of them including the idea that this is the Arnolfini marriage portrait, and I'll cover why we think that in just a moment. But really look at the detail of what Northern European painting is. When we look at art from Italy, the artworks are gigantic. Altarpieces 10 feet, 15 feet, 25 feet tall. Here, Northern European art is much, much smaller, but very detailed. Now, we'll take a look at some of the elements in this painting, which is why we think that this has been a wedding portrait. When we look at the shoes kicked aside at the lower left-hand side of the painting, as well as further back in the work between the two figures, we've got God's commandment to Moses to remove your shoes on holy ground. The dog in the front center is very much a symbol of fidelity. When we look at the lady at the right, a lot of people mention that she looks pregnant, and if this is his wife, Giovanni Arnolfini, she never becomes pregnant. Green is also the traditional wedding dress color in Northern Europe during the 1400s. In the back of the painting, we can see a chandelier, we can see the rosary, we can see a mirror, some writing above the mirror. Also a small finial on the bedpost, which is St. Margaret or St. Martha, the patron saint of childbirth. Focusing in on the chandelier, we also note that it has only one candle, and when we look at that type of symbol, we note that this signifies the presence of Christ. The writing above the mirror in the background says Johannes van Eyck Fruhik, which means Jan van Eyck was here. And when we look into the painting itself, we can see the backs of the individuals in the painting, but we can also see two other figures, and it's been long surmised that one of them is a priest officiating a ceremony, perhaps a marriage ceremony, and Jan van Eyck is signing his name on this painting really to serve as a witness to this event. And this is also exciting because it's really the first time that we have a work of art that is signed by an artist. You know, we normally think in today's world that, artists normally sign their work, but that hasn't always been the case. And there's even artists today that don't sign their work, but back during the Renaissance, art was made to order. It wasn't, important to have an artist's signature. So again, this is one of the first times we do see that. The circles around the mirror show the passions of Christ. This work at the left is really the first time we ever have a work signed. This is an Athenian artist, Euthymides, who is really the first one to sign works in about the 6th century BC. And he signs his works, Euthymides Painted Me, which has always been a really cool type of signature. We also note that we have some southern fruit, citrus fruit and such, something that we would see more around the Mediterranean climate. Here we have it in Northern Europe, and so we can also tell that these people are very well off, and we can also tell that about them from their clothes. Now, the dog, symbol of fidelity, this is also a rare breed of dog, an Affenpinscher, and again, this really denotes the wealth that we see from this family. Now, also, when we look at the painting in general and we take these symbols, this is what art historians do. And the term we want to associate with this is iconography. Iconography is translated as the study of the meaning of images. We take these ideas from this painting and we move forward with them. We create a narrative. We try to unravel the meaning, if you will, about this painting. So for years and years, we thought it was a wedding portrait, and that this was Giovanna and Giovanni Arnolfini. Now, a lot of recent documentation that we found about this painting shed some questions about the idea that this is a marriage ceremony, and perhaps it is really a painting that's a memorial painting for Giovanni's first wife, who is her name was Costanta Trenta, and she died perhaps during childbirth, and this woman here is positioned next to the bed, which is where they would have given birth to their child. One thing that's always bothered me about this painting personally is how real nondescript the faces are. In fact, they look very porcelain or doll-like. And it bothered me because the artist is able to create such incredible detail, especially in the mirror in the background and all the subtle images throughout. But the faces don't look authentic. They don't look real. And so I think that's a good argument that this could be a memorial portrait. But we still have the theories open. We're unsure at this time what this painting is. But many times you'll see it in older art history books, older meaning by 10 years or later, that this is still the Arnolfini marriage portrait. Now, one of the real exciting things to come out of Northern Europe is oil paint. And even Jan van Eyck and his brother help in the formulation of oil paint. Now, oil paint, just like linear perspective, revolutionizes painting. And it's invented in the 1430s in Northern Europe, in the area of Flanders. And it's far more adaptable and versatile than tempera is. It will completely replace tempera by about the year 1500. What's unique about oil paint, and what happens during this time, once oil paint is invented, it takes about 70 years for it to reach all the different parts of Italy. In converse, it's also taking about 70 years from the time that linear perspective is invented in Florence in 1428 by Filippo Brunelleschi. It takes 70 years for that idea and that formulation to move all the way to Northern Europe. So by about 1500, that's when you start to see Northern European paintings done in linear perspective. The Arnolfini portrait and several of the other works we'll see look as if there's a pretty good amount of space in these paintings, but they're not truly done in linear perspective. They are definitely not perfect. Rooms tend to, let's say, accelerate away from the viewer. Now, the biggest advantage of using oil paints is that they are slow to dry. When you're using fresco, you've got about 12 hours. When you're doing tempera paint, you've got about an hour. When you've got encaustic, you're moving very, very quickly. And encaustic is a mixture of hot wax and pigment, one of the oldest painting mediums. So you're up against the clock. But here with oil paint, it doesn't matter. We can slow down. We can leave the paint out overnight on the palette. We can rework paintings for literally days, weeks, months. Even a thin layer of oil paint takes about a year to dry. Oil paint can be applied in layers, and we won't see this until later on in the semester when we talk about Vincent van Gogh. He's the first artist who creates paintings done in impasto. We also have a certain amount of gestural freedom with this medium. Again, we can think about a Van Gogh painting such as The Starry Night, where we see his gesture of the path his arm took to create that painting. Oil paint can also be blended to create a continuous scale of colors, so we don't have any gaps as we do in the colors, for instance, of fresco painting. But oil paint is a production to use. You're going to need a palette to put the paint out on, and this is more of a current palette. You know, this is not the old wooden artist palette that we normally think of. This is glass with taped edges, and it's very easy to mix the paint on and also very easy to clean up. Brushes tend to be very, very expensive. For the high quality brushes, you're looking at $10 to $20 each. Palette knives to mix the paint. Oil paint is very, very heavy. It's a very thick consistency. So where we could mix other types of paint with our brushes, such as watercolor or gouache, there's much more density to oil paints. And we also need spreading agents in order to move the oil paint. It's very, very thick. We can't mix water with it because oil and water don't mix. So we have to use usually a mixture of turpentine, linseed, and paint thinner. And of course, not only do we have to work in well-ventilated areas using this equipment, but we also need to dispose of these chemicals properly. Back to another painting by Jan van Eyck. This is a man in a turban, and this is long believed to be a self-portrait of Van Eyck. Now, the reason he would have this done is not to lend himself to posterity, but this was a work that he would use to show people how good of an artist he was. If he was trying to get a commission from an individual, he could just show them the portrait and say, well, here's a painting of me by me, and here I am, and you be the judge for yourself how good of a painter I truly am. And when you look at the details of this work as well, you can see the redness in the eyes and the stubble of beard as well. It's really a fantastic painting, and he even paints some words onto the frame itself. Up in the very top, it is the Greek words "as I can." And the idea is that back in the medieval days in scriptoriums, this is how monks would sign their work. As I can, not as I would, meaning that, hey, I've done my very, very best. I wish I could do better. At the bottom, it is dated, and it is also signed by the artist's name and the term "me fake it," which basically means made me. And so, again, it's the artist signing his name and saying that I was the one who created this work. One last work by Van Eyck we'll look at is the Ghent altarpiece. This is, again, a tremendously important painting. We'll see it again during the art theft lecture, as well as some of the panels in the roles of the artist lecture. Now, you're never going to see it closed. This is not how it is normally on display, nor is it the way that we know this work. Altarpieces, many times during this period, are triptychs, meaning that there's 3 panels. The 2 panels close just like a door, and they can open up and show a tremendous scene on the inside of the image. So with the Ghent altarpiece, we're not really quite sure what Jan van Eyck completed and what his brother did. There's theories that his brother just completed the frame of the painting, but we're not quite sure. Now, the front of the Ghent altarpiece shows the donors or the patrons of the art in the lower left and right hand corners. We have St. John the Baptist and John the Evangelist, who are the patron saints of the city and the church where the Ghent altarpiece is located. Up above that, we have the Annunciation, where we have St. Michael, or the angel Michael, telling Mary that she is going to bear the Christ child. And there's words coming out of her mouth. And they're upside down because God is above her and he needs to read her response, which is something along the lines of, "Behold, I am the handmaiden of the Lord." Now, when we open the Ghent altarpiece, this is really what we know this work to be. We can see in the center down below, we have this fantastic scene of the mystic lamb. Up above, we have God in the center, and we have Mary and John the Baptist on either side, some angels, musicians on either side of them, and then in the far left and far right of the upper register, we have both Adam and Eve, and we'll take a look at some of the individual images. Adam and Eve, you can see, is no longer images of Roman copies, of Roman styles. These are very humanistic figures. We have God in the center, and we have a much different version of God than, let's say, the version by Michelangelo. And we'll talk about this again when we look at the roles of the artist in another week or two. Now, the Ghent altarpiece as well is in the richest part of the world at this time. And so you have a God that is bejeweled. You have him holding a scepter. He's wearing the three-tiered crown of the Pope, while a human crown is at his feet. His vestments are also richly adorned. So you have a very rich, very fanciful version of God here. And then this is the centerpiece down below of the mystic lamb, and here it is being recovered. The Ghent altarpiece is unique because it's been stolen so many times, literally stolen 13 times in its 500-year existence, the last time by Hitler and the Nazi Party in 1937. And I'll tell you that again, and we'll go into a little bit more detail during the lecture on art theft. This is actually where I'm going to stop this part of the presentation. Our next part will pick up here, and it will also talk about printmaking.